Buenos días a todos y todas. Muchas gracias por estar hoy con nosotros en este evento. América Latina y el Caribe, una oportunidad histórica para liderar una recuperación sostenible de la COVID-19. Quiero comentar que para los que necesiten traducción simultánea, tenemos la app Interaction IO con el código Recovery. Es para mí un placer estar hoy con vosotros. Soy Piedad Martín, la directora regional interina de la Oficina Regional del Programa de Naciones Unidas para el Medio Ambiente para América Latina y el Caribe. Voy a hacer el anuncio en inglés para que nuestros colegas también puedan vincularse a la traducción. Good morning, everyone. I'm Piedad Martin, the Regional Director, Acting Regional Director of UN Environment Program for Latin America and the Caribbean. If you need a simultaneous translation, please use the app Interaction IO with the code Recovery. Bueno, con esto, primero que todo, quiero expresar y enviar nuestra solidaridad con todos ustedes. Sabemos que la región está sufriendo mucho en esta época de crisis de la COVID. Es la región más devastada. Los datos nos están diciendo que 1 de cada 4 muertos globales son en la región. Estamos sufriendo en lo personal, en lo profesional. El PIB ha disminuido un 8%, los empleos han subido a 30 millones. Se está agravando la crisis social y económica, la desigualdad, la crisis de gobernanza, la vulnerabilidad también a temas ambientales y climáticos. Pero, sin embargo, la región se ha estado comprometiendo y también sacrificando para dar respuesta a esta crisis de salud. Ha priorizado las inversiones en emergencia para salvar vidas, para fortalecer los sistemas de salud y, como vamos a ver, también ha empezado a priorizar con un gran compromiso el invertir en la recuperación. Lo que vamos a ver precisamente hoy es si esta recuperación está orientada hacia unos sectores verdes, sostenibles ambientalmente y a lograr el Acuerdo de París y qué más se podría hacer para ello. Quería comentar que el 22 Foro de Ministros y Ministras de Medio Ambiente de la región se reunió en febrero, hizo un comunicado ministerial muy fuerte abocando por la relación que está teniendo esta crisis con la protección del medio ambiente, la necesidad de regenerar nuestros ecosistemas para prevenir futuras crisis, tanto de salud como climáticas, y la labor que hace la naturaleza en protegernos de ellas. Por eso es que nos comendaron como Secretaría del Foro al Programa Naciones Unidas para el Medio Ambiente el apoyar líneas de acción concretas para una recuperación sostenible de la COVID. Uno de los primeros pasos ha sido precisamente crear este tracker, observatorio, plataforma de seguimiento de estas inversiones para apoyar que los tomadores de decisiones de la región tengan información al día, información que recoge los anuncios públicos y de inversión, en este momento más de 1.000 que los 33 países de la región han hecho, y que analiza qué tanto están orientados a temas que contribuyan a la acción contra el clima, para el clima, la acción contra la contaminación o para la protección de la biodiversidad. Entonces, nosotros como Secretaría nos hemos abocado con la Universidad de Oxford a hacer este ejercicio y hoy vamos a mostrar tanto la plataforma como los primeros hallazgos de este análisis. Quería comentar que ya estamos también trabajando en 6 países para ver exactamente qué significa una recuperación verde frente a una recuperación hecha en la misma trayectoria de desarrollo que hasta ahora, y estamos encontrando elementos muy importantes. Por ejemplo, en el caso de Panamá, hicimos un análisis con un modelo de economía verde de qué significaría hacer una transición energética hacia la sostenibilidad con la que ya el país está comprometido, y encontramos hallazgos de que significaría 5 veces más empleos que seguir apostando a los combustibles fósiles, y también una mayor competitividad y reactivación de los ingresos y el PIB. Entonces, tenemos datos muy entusiasmantes, esperanzadores. Creemos que frente a esta crisis, en donde además los jóvenes han sido de los que más han sufrido, han visto sus sueños rotos, han visto cómo se les han cerrado oportunidades, tenemos que creer en un futuro mejor y poner nuestra esperanza en temas que nos generen ilusión. Uno de ellos es la sostenibilidad ambiental, un planeta que nos sostenga, que sea fuerte frente al clima y ojalá que pueda detener esta crisis climática a tiempo. Quería comentar por último que pueden encontrar la plataforma en recuperacionverde.org Y sin más, también anunciar que tendremos ahora una presentación de la Universidad de Oxford y después seguida de un panel de alto nivel. Quiero agradecer particularmente a la ministra Andrea Mesa de Costa Rica por moderar este panel, tanto como ministra como presidenta del Foro de Ministros y Ministras de Medio Ambiente. Ella también introducirá a nuestros distinguidos panelistas, pero primero que todo queremos sentar las bases de qué hemos logrado hasta ahora, cómo estamos viendo a la región en este tema, y quería darle la bienvenida a Brian O'Callaghan de la Universidad de Oxford. En este sentido, good morning, Brian. Thanks for being here. He's the lead researcher and project manager of the Oxford University Economic Recovery Project. I listen a little bit of echo, but thank you, Brian, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Hi there, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Fantastic. Yes, and thank you for that very generous introduction. The region of Latin America and the Caribbean finds itself at an existential crossroads. Leaders are being forced to make a very much pivotal choice. In restarting their economies, will they continue to support the unsustainable and pollutive industries that may have been helpful in the past but are now dying? Or will they shift their economies to the sustainable industries which will bring prosperity into the future? Now, the consequences of their decisions will be felt for generations on economic, environmental, and social planes. And to be clear, this isn't an economy versus environment discussion. As has been shown time and time again, environmentally sustainable priorities can bring just as high economic returns, if not higher. So no, this is not an economy versus environment discussion. Rather, it's a past versus future discussion. It is a for the few or for the many discussion. It's a question of whether leaders have the strength to prioritize their people today and future generations still coming. Now, to put it in a little bit of biblical context, an analogy that I was thinking about, you remember Saul of Tarsus, who spent his early years persecuting Christians. Through an act of God, he's blinded on the road to Damascus, and in the most extreme of circumstances, he comes to the Christian faith. I think what we need is more Damascus Road moments on climate and the environment. Points where our government leaders awake to take our economies from a pathway of pain and put them onto a pathway of prosperity. For many, COVID-19 may provide a little bit extra of a push, a moment of reflection, perhaps, because we just can't go on operating in the unsustainable ways that we have done in the past. It's time for us to make a change in support of our future. And so today, for that reason, I'm very pleased to introduce the Latin America and the Caribbean Recovery Tracker, which is a new platform which reports on a live basis about spending across the region. The tracker counts both what has been announced and by who, as well as categorizing the spending and assessing its environmental and its social characteristics. It's a tool designed as a subset of the Global Recovery Observatory for people to keep their governments accountable, so there's no more hiding. And it's also designed to help governments and policymakers learn from what others are doing. You can see the logos of the partners on the screen. The great benefit of a program like this is that it brings together so many different important and powerful players, including Oxford, the UN Environment Programme, UN Development Programme, UN PAGE, as well as the Green Fiscal Policy Network, which includes the IMF and the German Corporation for International Cooperation. So on the screen, you'll see just how Latin America and the Caribbean have used public spending to respond to COVID-19 so far. You'll see that for many reasons, investment has been rather low compared to the rest of the world. We count about $318 billion, which is 6.1% of GDP in the region. Meanwhile, other emerging market and developing economies have spent 11% of GDP. And advanced economies are up near 26%, or 13 trillion. We'll get to the drivers of some of that disparity in just a moment. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about the low level of spending as a result of the stage of the pandemic. Many advanced economies, they see the light at the end of the COVID tunnel, and they've been investing significantly in what we call recovery spending, which is designed for the long term to reinvigorate their economies. Meanwhile, as LAC continues to face a health emergency, proportionally more focus has been on short-term rescue spending, which is designed to keep people and businesses alive. So what that ultimately means is there's still a significant opportunity ahead for recovery investment in LAC over the coming months and years. So really now is the time for these nations, the nations in your region, to focus on developing smart and environmentally sustainable investment options. You will note that at the bottom here, this little green bar, governments in the region haven't made very much of a move on environmental spending, sustainable spending yet. In fact, that type of spending has been overall spending has been far less sustainable than many other countries. LAC has spent only 0.5% on environmentally sustainable policies, compared to 2.8% globally, which is still low. And then on recovery spending, the difference is even worse. In the global average is 19.2% of global recovery spending has been sustainable, 19.2%. In Latin America and the Caribbean, it's only 2.2%. So as I say, a long way to go. And environmentally negative spending in the region is also lagging. It's almost 5 times more on a proportional basis, and compared to environmentally sustainable spending, so not proportional. And it is also several times higher on a proportional basis than the global average. So not only haven't we been spending very much that is environmentally sustainable, we've been spending a huge amount that is environmentally negative, and it's reinforcing the existing negative fossil industries that have dominated our economies in the past. Now, the benefits of environmentally sustainable spending are significant. And as I showed in a paper last year with Nobel Prize laureate Joseph Stiglitz and Cameron Hepburn and several others, in an economic downturn, sustainable spending can have more positive impact than traditional spending on recovery. And in the long term, the benefits are also obviously significant. We like to say that recession sanctions rebirth, and we have a need to change how our economies operate. If we do it well, an environmentally sustainable recovery could decrease social inequalities while setting forward a high growth and sustainable pathway. So how have nations done in comparison to each other in the region? Well, to be honest, we don't see very many strong leaders. Everyone has room to improve. We have seen some early promise, you'll see in this box here, some early promise from Jamaica, Brazil, Panama, and Colombia, who have each dedicated a significant portion of their announced recovery spending to sustainable initiatives. But even those nations just haven't spent very much in total yet. And so while we're hopeful for the future, and we're hopeful that the trend continues, there isn't that much to look at just yet. You will note that there are some nations in this missing opportunities box. These countries have not been very green in their recovery spending so far. However, they also have opportunities ahead to do more, and that's where we'd like to focus on the future. But you might be asking, are there really policies that can bring both economic growth and be good for the environment? Well, our report, which will be released next week, it shows without a shadow of a doubt that there are these positive opportunities. We count over 40 positive policies in Latin America and the Caribbean already for governments to learn from. And in the Global Recovery Observatory, which is the bigger data set that is a part of this, there are over 500 different policies that we can look at and learn from. And they can all be found online through our database. There is, however, another part to this story, just as I finish up. Latin America and the Caribbean is just not starting from the same point as advanced economies. So in some ways, it's not fair to compare them directly to advanced economies. Before COVID-19, the gap between Latin American nations and Caribbean nations and the advanced economies, that gap was already significant. COVID has disproportionately brought health and economic strain to the region and thereby extended that gap. Unfortunately, because Latin American and Caribbean countries now don't have very much to spend in response to COVID, we project that that gap is going to grow even more. Already, and you'll see on screen here, already we track nearly 13,000 US dollars per person in spending in advanced economies versus only 490 in LAC. And the overall implication of this is simple. In this report, I'm calling on advanced economies to significantly and immediately increase their financial support of the region and of the global south more broadly. The G7 is meeting here in the UK tomorrow, and it's time that rich nations, including the G7, acknowledge the consequences of their past and current actions on climate and how that affects other less wealthy nations. We must acknowledge that we've caused, the rich world at least has caused untold economic and health pains, and we must act now to bring a step change in our support of the global south. If that support is to come, and we've seen the special drawing rights announcements already from the IMF, we need more of that. If that support is to come, the region needs to be intentional about how it uses that funding. It needs to use that money to secure sustainable growth again, which is oriented to the long term. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much again for the invitation to join. I'm looking forward to the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you all. I'm sorry, I was having problems with my microphone. Do you hear me well? Yes, thank you. Thank you for this intervention, and I think that now we have the tool, and I think that this is the important message today, that we're launching this tool to continue analyzing the different policies, the different packages of policies that we have in our region, and see which are the priorities that we are putting in the center of the decisions in the different countries. The numbers right now, where are those numbers? I know that we need to continue generating more information, and this could be changing, but this is the nice thing about having right now a tool. So we will have a high-level panel, and I'm really want to thank all the distinguished panels that we have to have a conversation around these tendencies and what we are identifying, but mostly to understand and have a conversation around the opportunities that the LAC region has to enhance these recovery packages, and as I would say, as Brian was saying, and to take the right decisions and not continue these conversations of growth and sustainability, because it is not, we don't have here a controversy. Instead, it is to take the pathway of prosperity. This is something that I really think it's the right way to approach these decisions. So right now, I'm going to start with the panel. We have with us Inger Andersen, who is the Executive Director of UN Environment. Inger from Nairobi. Thank you so much for being here and sharing these words here with the LAC region. It's very important for us to have you here. to analyze these different elements that we have. And basically, thank you so much to UN Environment for supporting to generate, and to Oxford University for generating this tool. Inger, what we're seeing here is, what is the work of the lag recovery tracker important, and what does it say about our region? Some thoughts from your side, please, Inger. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to you, Minister, but also thank you to Brian and our colleagues at Oxford and our partners, because this tracker really, and Brian did such a brilliant job, this Damascus Road moment that we all need to have. Secretary General has remarked, Secretary General Guterres has remarked how the COVID pandemic really has reminded us that we cannot continue just to ignore the risks that we are facing, these environmental risks. In UNEP, we speak about these three planetary crises: the climate crisis, everyone has understood that by now. The biodiversity and nature crisis, I think in this region, in the LAC region, it is well understood. And the pollution and waste crisis, our toxic trail that we humans are leaving behind our development and our growth. And each of these we need to tackle, and we need to tackle them together. And as we have this tool now, it offers us up some understanding. And I think we heard from Brian some of that understanding, because we understand that, as we heard, 2% of the recovery spending in LAC has been on green characteristics, while the global average is 19%. Now, this is a region that has some structural dimensions to the crisis. The region makes up a little over 8% of the global population, but 19% of COVID infections and a quarter of all deaths. Now, that tragedy then means that we've seen that huge economic contraction, around 8% according to the IMF, and unemployment going up and poverty going up. So these drivers are serious. And this is where we need to understand that when we speak about these three crises, the climate, the biodiversity, and the pollution crisis, this region has a huge and significant dependence on nature, on a reliable and steady climate, and obviously not on pollution. If we think that half of the countries in Latin America are commodity dependent, stuff comes out of the earth to create growth, opportunity, and jobs, right? Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Ecuador, Salvador, and they're really dependent on agriculture. Venezuela, Colombia, Bolivia on energy, Peru and Chile on minerals, and the Caribbean on tourism. And each of these drivers, climate, biodiversity loss, pollution, will pull the carpets from under these countries and their growth model. And add to that climate risk, that real risk, add to that the kind of disasters that we could see. We already have these projections by a variety of studies that says that 17 million people by 2050 could be displaced if we do not take action. So and at the same time, we're shaving points off the GDP lost to climate events. So the kind of inspiring example that Brian talked about, that Jamaica, nevertheless, for the small monies that they had for recovery, they put it 100% towards green. That Panama, Colombia, Brazil, and others have done so. That's a positive thing. But we need to understand that the days where environment was over here and growth is over here, that is long, long gone. And the exciting part about this tracker is that it becomes, in a way, a cookbook for governments and for those who vote for the governments to see whether, and for the media and for us all, to see whether are the governments really putting the citizens' interest and that of the next generation at heart. Is the government really implementing policies, not just for near-term interest and the next electoral cycle, but indeed for intergenerational justice? Because is the government making use of that cookbook, that tracker, and these policies so that they can tackle climate change, they can tackle nature conservation and protection and its bounty for us, and they can deal with pollution? And that's really what this tracker is all about. So, Minister Meza, we are very excited about this tracker, and we know that it will enable countries to sort of take stock of where they're going, to support policymakers, civil society, and citizens to make that building back better, and to root that really in a strong, resilient recovery.
Thank you, Inger. And we totally agree. This is an excellent tool for this to take stock. I totally agree. And I will now like to just make a few remarks on this. This is an initial data, and it's something very important to highlight that we will continue analyzing. Because there are some elements, for example, in the case of Costa Rica, just a small remark. We launched the decarbonization in 2019, the decarbonization plan. And for us, for example, right now, the discussion was how can we continue to prioritize the investments in the decarbonization plan? And that was a little bit the recovery decisions that we are taking. And this is not really reflected right now, but it is something that we will analyze, for example, with the colleagues of the tracker. But I think the important element here is we have the tool, and this is so important to do this analysis in the region. And, the more information we have, the better picture of what is going on in the region we will have. But thank you, Inger, so much. We will continue. And now I want to go to the Caribbean side. And we have Adrian Ford, our Minister of Environment and National Beautification. And I would like to hear from you, Minister. What do the COVID-19 and climate crisis have in common in the small island developing states in the region? And what particularities do we need to consider for a sustainable recovery in the Caribbean? Minister, the floor is yours. Minister, your microphone, please. We see you well, but we don't hear you. Yes, Minister, it's not working. The mic.
Hello?
Now, here we have you. Now we can hear you.
My apologies. Good morning. My apologies.
Good
My humblest
morning.
apologies.
No.
Sorry. I know how we operate in virtual space, and sometimes
we all face these technological challenges, Minister. We understand absolutely. Just to see, did you hear the question or?
Of course, I heard the questions, and I want to thank you, first of all, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I want to apologize for the little mishap at first with understanding the virtual idiosyncrasies that we face post-COVID. First, let me take this opportunity to convey regrets on behalf of our Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Amamotley, QC, who was unable to address the session this morning due to some other engagements, and I'm happy to take up the mantle on her behalf. I wish to first thank the United Nations, the Environment Program, for hosting this very important high-level session. Madam Chair, in response to the first question regarding commonalities between COVID-19 and climate crisis in small island developing states, it's important to reflect on the existing situation impacting our region. A year has since passed when the first COVID case was reported in our region. Unfortunately, for us in Latin America and the Caribbean, our region was one of the most affected regions since this epidemic. Last month alone, we had the director of the Pan American Health Organization reported that more than 1 million persons in Latin America and the Caribbean have died from the virus. Further, in April of 2021, in its World Economic Outlook, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, projected a 7.0% economic contraction for the region. And this certainly is endemic to say the least. In 2020, in the Caribbean, the most dependent region in the world, small island developing states or cities, such as Barbados, have witnessed declines in GDP as high as 17%. Tourism for some Caribbean countries represent 34 to 48% of GDP. And as such, lockdowns in many of our source markets have resulted in business closures, record job losses, restrictions of foreign exchange earnings, reduction in foreign direct investment, and disruption of local production, trade, and associated value chains. With respect to the climate change, we are reminded of the devastating and record-breaking hurricane season in recent years witnessed in this hemisphere. Last year alone, you had about 30-something hurricanes, which is a doubling of the previous year. World bracing for what scientists are predicting as an above-average year for hurricane activities. We always have to be minded of the idiosyncrasies and vagaries of climate change and natural disasters. And our region continues to witness other significant climate-related impacts, such as high-level sea rise, water and vector-borne diseases. Of course, there's the twin effect of dengue fever in Barbados, along with COVID, and that was something we had to monitor carefully, recognizing, of course, that they have similar side effects and similar presentation in terms of symptoms. And of course, there's a changing precipitation and temperature patterns that threaten society, productivity, and ecology. Caribbean small economies are therefore proverbially and literally boxed by the twin association of climate and coronavirus pandemic. The Commonwealth of Bahamas is a case in point. According to one IDP commentator, the coronavirus represents the second major economic shock in a year for the country. Hurricane Dorian inflicted losses that amounted to $3.4 billion, or 27% of GDP. COVID-19 has also undermined our fiscal ability to address our climate ambition. Significant public finance has had to be diverted from our climate adaptation and mitigation activities towards healthcare and social protection, which was, of course, vital and important at that point in time. Both phenomena represents, therefore, threats to national safety and security, disruption of social cohesion and culture, reduced fiscal space necessary to sustain development of our people and economy, and significantly, both undermine our efforts for building climate and overall environmental resilience. A sustainable green economic recovery, or green recovery for the Caribbean states, must be based on achieving the outcomes of protecting life and safeguarding livelihoods. These outcomes should remain at the epicenter of our COVID-19 and climate policy frameworks. This is no mean feat, as the Caribbean and wider Latin America region continues to struggle with equitable and adequate access to vaccines, several years of disappointing growth, deep-rooted structural inequalities, and significant ecosystem disruption. But with limited fiscal space, increasing debt levels, and perennial challenges in accessing needed concessional finance, short and medium-term public policies that result in positive double dividends in relation to both crises are essential. Caribbean planners are also required to access a wide range of policy tools, much needed capacity and competencies if the double dividend is to be realized. Scenario planning, forecasting, environmental informatics, real-time observation systems, access to regional peer-to-peer networks, alliances with specialized policy institutes throughout our region, and financing for targeted applied research and development are all critical for new and much needed policy innovations. I know we have the will, as captured so eloquently in instruments such as the 2021 Bridgetown Declaration and accompanying decisions of the 22nd Forum of Ministers of the Environment of Latin America and the Caribbean. Needed now are practical partnerships and the financial and technical wherewithal and resources to enable action. That's the first segment of my question.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for bringing all these clear needs that we have as a region to address this challenge. But now I would like to move to another critical stakeholder in this recovery process. And we have from the IMF, the Deputy Director for the Western Hemisphere Department, Julie Kozak. Just to confirm that Julie is already here with us. Is Julie here? Okay. Julie is not something, we have some technical elements, so I'm going to then go to my other panelist. And we have with us the UNF Executive Secretary, our friend Patricia Espinosa. Patricia, gracias por estar aquí. Un placer tenerte, un honor tenerte en este foro para ver estas reflexiones. Realmente creo que hoy lo crítico es, tenemos la herramienta, una herramienta muy valiosa para la toma de decisiones de nuestros gobiernos. Los números no son los números nos llaman a la reflexión. Tenemos que tomar decisiones importantes. Es una región muy dependiente. Ya vimos de unas economías muy extractivistas. En muchos de los casos son decisiones complejas, pero lo vimos. Pero no son decisiones que nos llevan a perder empleo, sino todo lo contrario. Son las oportunidades que tenemos justamente para avanzar en esa definición del modelo de desarrollo y llegar a las metas que tenemos del Acuerdo de París. Entonces, en estos contextos, Patricia, hemos escuchado que los países ricos deben intensificar sus compromisos financieros y lo veíamos incluso ahorita con la reflexión que nos hacía el ministro Ford para ayudar al mundo en desarrollo a enfrentar la crisis climática. Pero los altos niveles de deuda, debido a los esfuerzos de recuperación, ejercen presión sobre los gobiernos tanto en los países ricos como en los países en desarrollo. ¿Cómo podemos abordar esto de una manera colaborativa en el marco del espíritu del multilateralismo? ¿Cómo asegurarnos de que se cumplan las promesas hechas? Patricia, adelante. No te escuchamos. Un segundo para ver si podemos probar el micrófono. Ahora sí. Gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, querida ministra, querida Andrea. Muchas gracias por la invitación y la oportunidad de participar. Y quiero empezar felicitándote y felicitando a todos quienes han hecho posible esta iniciativa de crear esta herramienta que es fundamental. Y en efecto, en la región, una región que ha sido ya identificada como la región más desigual en el mundo, se suma ahora este reto que viene derivado de las consecuencias de la pandemia y encontramos una realidad verdaderamente difícil de abordar hacia una recuperación sostenible. Así es que muchas gracias a todos ustedes que han hecho posible la creación de esta herramienta. Yo espero y creo que será una herramienta que podrá indicar también el camino en otras regiones, en otras latitudes. Y si me permites, yo quisiera referirme a la pregunta que me has formulado y quisiera dar la respuesta en inglés. So the statement regarding the obligation of developed countries to support developing countries in their efforts to address climate change remains true. I have said it before, and I want to make this point again. Supporting climate action in developing countries is not just a question of solidarity, but rather of enlightened self-interest. All countries will be touched, and we are seeing this in one way or another by the unfolding climate crisis. No country or group of countries, however influential, can solve this global crisis without the active engagement of all others. The whole world stands to gain from this vital partnership. And of course, acting against climate change requires financial support. And this is equally true about not acting against climate change. Keeping in place the policies and practices of the past, the so-called business as usual approach, also depends on the availability of financial resources. And you were showing, when we were seeing the presentation, you were showing how much is being invested in non-sustainable sectors. So that is very clear. Whatever countries do, whether they choose to invest in promoting climate action or not, will ultimately involve the allocation of financial resources, both public and private. And these will have consequences for our climate. So there is, so to speak, no neutral financial stance regarding climate change. Whether you work to address climate change or you work against or you work to incentivize and perpetuate the trends that are producing climate change, in both cases, you are allocating resources. So it is therefore misleading to assert that there are insufficient financial resources available to support climate action. At this very moment, national governments and private companies are making significant investments to promote a strong economic recovery. And they are right to do so. The well-being of people around the world depends on this. But at the present time, the crucial test for all investments in a recovery will be whether they are consistent with the urgent shift to the clean, green, sustainable future that the world so desperately needs. So countries, and this means both the public and the private sectors, must discard the short-sighted measures in favor of a long-term vision that paves the way to an environmentally sound, sustainable economy. One that puts us on the path to limiting the rise in the global average temperature below 1.5 degrees centigrade. So the answer to your question about the difficulties posed by the current lack of fiscal space to support climate action is this. It is not so much a matter of spending more, but of spending better, of getting our priorities right. So governments must take a hard look at their budgets and ensure that their expenditures, particularly those intended to promote a recovery, move away from an emissions-intensive economy towards one that is increasingly carbon neutral. Available resources must be allocated in a way that is consistent with the overall climate action commitments that governments have undertaken. That is what the international community has agreed when the Paris Agreement was adopted. And that is something that this tool that you are launching today is going to be supporting. Let me briefly address the second point of your question regarding the fulfillment of previous pledges. Over a decade ago, it was agreed that developed countries would provide $100 billion annually to support developing countries' climate action needs. And what we have seen is significant progress, yes. However, not at the pace desired when the COVID-19 struck. The economic and social consequences of the pandemic understandably forced governments to reassess their priorities to protect the lives and livelihoods of their peoples. But as I have mentioned, the strategies being drawn around the world provide an opportunity to redirect financial resources to an economic recovery that is sound and sustainable. And this must include the fulfillment of the 100 billion pledge and preferably going beyond that figure over the coming years. So how can we make sure that those commitments are honored? This is something, Minister, that we at the UN Climate Change Secretariat are constantly striving for, helping countries to live up to their commitments as well as to raise their level of ambition in a way that is commensurate with the challenge posed by climate change to the world. So thank you again very much for putting in place this very, very helpful and valuable tool. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you, querida Patricia. Thank you for these reflections and very clear messages. It's not about a matter of spending more, but the quality of this investment and the element of the of all the milestones that we have and the importance of climate finance to generate trust is a moment of a revolution of solidarity, and we really need to address this. And we thank you for your voice on these aspects as well. I think that we have Julie from IMF ready now. Do we have Julie? Julie, thank you. Thank you for connecting. And well, IMF, it's also a very important stakeholder right now in the region and can play a critical role in this moment in the decisions that the different governments are taking around the policies, the economic policies, and around the green recovery. So we would like to hear from you, Jolie. How's the climate change and green recovery relates to IMF's work on economic and financial stability? Over to you, Julie.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister. And I apologize for the technical difficulties before. I am connected now from my iPhone, so hopefully the sound will be not too bad. But let me generally thank you, Minister, and also Brian for the introduction. Congratulations on the development of this climate tracker. I think it's a very useful tool. And also thank you to the UN for organizing this conference. To get right to your question, Minister, essentially, what is the role of the IMF in the green recovery, climate change, and how does it relate to our work? I think the best way to answer that question is to really go back to, the IMF's mandate. And our mandate is really the stability of the global financial system. And this involves both macroeconomic and financial stability at the global level, but also at the individual country level. So we approach the issue of climate change by asking the question, is climate change macroeconomically critical and relevant? And I think the answer is resoundingly, yes, it is. And this macroeconomic relevance comes from several areas, but we really think about it as looking at the costs of climate change or the risks of climate change for the macroeconomy. And these costs and risks can come from both, say, natural disasters or rising sea levels, but also the costs and risks associated with mitigation and adaptation. And I think some other speakers have already mentioned, debt, fiscal costs, spending pressures, revenue, financing. And so this is also the perspective that we take when thinking about does climate change fit into our mandate? And we see several channels by which several channels through which climate change can fit in with the IMF's mandate. So obviously there are fiscal costs. These have already been mentioned, both damage, from climate-related disasters, but also the costs associated with mitigation and adaptation, can put pressure on countries' debt and debt sustainability. There are transition costs. These we can think of as, transitioning to a green economy and the ways that it affects employment growth and competitiveness. Again, some speakers have already spoken to this issue, including the potential for new jobs, job-rich green recovery. And that's something that is very important to think about. And also there's, the perspective of domestic stability and societal cohesion, because we know that the costs of climate change will be unequally distributed across households and firms. So there's also a role to look at this. More from a global perspective, we also expect that there will be a redistribution of income globally. Climate change seems likely to affect poorer and hotter countries more adversely than richer and cooler countries. So this is also a perspective that the IMF takes from our global mandate. And then, of course, when we look at finance, we have to look at the financial stability perspective. So when we think about asset prices, physical and financial asset valuations are likely to change due to climate risks. And this means that households, firms, and financial institutions will be affected. And this can then affect both macroeconomic stability and financial stability. And of course, as has already been mentioned, climate change is already having an impact on many of the IMF's members' macroeconomic stability and prospects for growth. We've seen a number of natural disasters affect countries with high vulnerability to these kind of disasters. Many of them have been in the Latin American and Caribbean region, especially in the Caribbean and Central America. We've also seen increased incidences of drought and flooding, which have affected many countries. So this, we are already seeing the impact and the macroeconomic impact of climate change. So because we see climate change as impacting economic and financial stability, we do see it as pertaining to our mandate. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we start to address this? Well, the world has been focused in the last year very much on the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, and that's obviously very justifiable. We at the IMF have also been very focused on this. And of course, the pandemic has been especially severe in the Latin American and Caribbean region. The good news is that the global economy has started to recover economically, and some countries are starting to have better health outcomes. But the pandemic is clearly still with us, and it's been particularly virulent, as others have said, in our region. But the COVID crisis has also demonstrated our vulnerability to the power of nature, if you will, and it's also emphasized again or brought home our interconnectedness globally. So we do now have an opportunity to think about how do we rebuild our economies to become more sustainable and resilient while maintaining efficiency and inclusive growth. And this is where we at the IMF are really starting to turn our focus now. As was already mentioned, we're in the process of working toward an SDR allocation of 650 billion. This has not yet been approved by the membership, but we are in the process of moving that forward, and we certainly are hopeful that there will be approval. And we also agree that more needs to be done, and we're committed to working with both our membership and the international community in doing this. I think some of these issues have already been raised by others, right? We need to work with member countries to find ways to both raise domestic revenue in some cases, but also improve the allocation of spending. Patricia, who spoke before me, mentioned spending better, and this is also going to be critical. And in terms of the role that the IMF can play, we can provide policy advice, we can help countries examine trade-offs, we can help analyze the impact of different policies, we can help countries integrate climate risks and financing into their macroeconomic frameworks. We can do this through our policy advice, we can do this through our technical assistance, and of course, we always stand ready to help our countries with our lending facilities. Should they need financing, should they find themselves having balance of payments needs, where we can provide temporary support. So there's many ways I think that the IMF can contribute in this area. It is a macro critical area, as we say in our jargon, and it does, from that perspective, fit squarely within our mandate. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie, for this contribution. It's very important for us to hear that, yes, climate change, it's part now of your mandate because it generates macroeconomic impact. I think that is so clear now. Nobody can say that this is not the case, especially in a region like ours, and how it is affecting this macro stability in different areas. And this, you brought this issue of social coherence and social stability, which I think it is part also of the elements that we need to understand. And the more we pay attention to what the different citizens are requesting from us governments, it's also this to address inequalities, but also to address elements of sustainability and physical and financial assets. And I will say we really need to move and understand that nature is also an asset. And I think this is also another of the contributions that the region can bring. And related to this, now I would like to invite my friend Gabriel Quijandría, the Minister of Environment of Peru. Gabriel, gracias por estar aquí y un poco siguiendo estas reflexiones, ¿no? Ya vimos ese contexto general de la política del multilateralismo, vemos el rol del Fondo Monetario Internacional. Y ahora necesitamos entender también cuál es el rol que juegan otras facilidades, como el Fondo Verde del Clima, ¿no? Y entiendo que tienes mucha experiencia, que has estado cerca del fondo y de cómo interactúa. Entonces, ¿qué rol pueden tener estas entidades en este proceso de recuperación económica sostenible en el corto y en el largo plazo? Y bueno, y que hablemos con este nivel de transparencia y de confianza, ¿en qué cosas deberían de cambiar? ¿Hay cosas que pueden mejorar? ¿Cuáles son esas cosas que pueden mejorar? Gabriel, adelante. Estás con el micrófono apagado.
Thank you, Minister Mesa, and thank you for your leadership and in these discussions. I want to thank UNEP and the Oxford Smith School for the invitation to be part of this panel. And now, if you allow me, I will shift to Spanish to answer the interesting question. Creo que los fondos ambientales cumplen un papel muy relevante en términos de esto que Brian e Inger han planteado, de la oportunidad de pensar fuera de la caja, de empezar a salir de estos bretes, como se dice en costarricense, ¿no? De estas limitaciones que hemos tenido respecto de cómo pensar el modelo, de cómo pensar el tema del acercamiento de la actividad productiva al ambiente o a la naturaleza, ¿no? Y creo que estos fondos, en la medida en que tienen este mandato de promover la transición hacia economías bajas en carbono, hacia economías más resilientes y sociedades o países más bajos en carbono y resilientes, pueden apoyar en este esfuerzo de construir esta reactivación verde, ¿no? Que es la única que nos va a permitir una solución a largo plazo de esta situación que estamos viviendo en este momento. A una situación generada por un determinante ambiental, como es la zoonosis conocida como COVID-19, tenemos que responderla con acciones que también vengan del punto de vista ambiental, que pasen por hacer una transversalización de la mirada ambiental, de la mirada de la protección de los ecosistemas, de la resiliencia, de la carbono neutralidad, de la reducción de la huella hídrica en los esfuerzos por reactivar la economía. Y creo que ahí los fondos tienen un papel muy, muy importante de buscar cómo alinear la reactivación, por ejemplo, a los esfuerzos que los países han asumido en el marco del Acuerdo de París de avanzar sus NDCs. Que, por ejemplo, en el caso nuestro, la NDC la hemos convertido en nuestro desafío climático, our Climate Challenge. Porque coincide con la sigla NDC, para hacerlo más entendible, para hacerlo como algo que permite darse cuenta de la necesidad de aprovechar la situación que se ha generado con el COVID para profundizar ciertas transformaciones o ciertas transiciones que ya estaban ocurriendo en nuestros países, ¿no? La electromovilidad, la incorporación de energías renovables en la matriz, el tema de las cadenas productivas libres de deforestación, ya estaban ocurriendo antes de la pandemia. Tal vez no a la velocidad o a la profundidad que necesitábamos, y por tanto esta es una oportunidad para hacerlo más fuerte, para hacerlo más profundo, para hacerlo más rápido, para lograr que ciertos problemas o dudas que teníamos acerca de que si esa era la ruta, se puedan romper y podamos romper estos cuellos de botella y que podamos desplegar, por ejemplo, la fuerza del financiamiento. Por ejemplo, los fondos tienen la flexibilidad de financiar determinados tipos de actividades que son tal vez un poco riesgosas o vistas como riesgosas por el sector privado. Bueno, ahí hay la posibilidad de testear determinadas hipótesis, determinadas formas de hacer las cosas que luego de utilizar estos recursos de fondos como el Fondo Verde podrían escalarse para inversión pública, para inversión privada, nacional o internacional. Entendiendo que estos fondos, ¿no? Los fondos que vienen de los fondos ambientales o los fondos con apellido, ¿no? Digamos, los climáticos, los de diversidad biológica, los ambientales, no alcanzan para revertir el problema. Lo que necesitamos es que estos generen, make the case, que estos produzcan la evidencia que permite que después entren los fondos más grandes, los públicos, los privados, y que permitan escalar esta nueva forma de hacer negocios, esta nueva forma de impulsar desarrollo en nuestros países. Y que permitan discutir discutir o poner sobre la mesa parte de algunos de los temas que la pandemia ha puesto sobre la mesa. El trabajo remoto y la posibilidad de tener, como estamos teniendo ahora, una interacción a distancia, sin necesidad de juntarnos todos en un mismo sitio. La posibilidad de lo que se empieza a llamar un poco la desmaterialización de la economía, que pone en cuestión, por ejemplo, en el ámbito amazónico, el tema de las grandes carreteras, ¿no? Y las grandes infraestructuras para conectar o articular territorialmente los territorios. ¿Siguen siendo necesarias? O más bien lo que necesitamos es acelerar la fibra óptica para que las transacciones comerciales que se pueden hacer sin necesidad de una gran carretera fluyan de manera adecuada. O sea, pensar nuevamente, como lo decía Brian, fuera de la caja, o sea, salir de la discusión entre crecimiento, desarrollo, y entrar en la discusión crecimiento entendido de la manera antigua contra crecimiento entendido en la manera moderna. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, ministro, y unas reflexiones muy interesantes, sin duda. Necesitamos salirnos de la caja absolutamente, si no esta transición ecológica, esta transición energética, que al final es de eso, cómo aceleramos esos procesos que decíamos que estaban. Y gracias por traer ese punto. Yo creo que uno de los retos que tenemos ahora con la herramienta, con el tracker, es cómo evidenciamos estas políticas que ya venían antes y que justamente lo que necesitamos es acelerarlas, ¿no? Y que eso sea ahí también considerado en la herramienta, y cómo hacemos para consolidar este proceso de transición ecológica y energética. Vamos ahora con Daniel Gómez, del Departamento de Planeación de Colombia. Daniel, muchas gracias por estar aquí, y tenemos en estas mismas ideas de reflexiones, ¿no? Cómo la recuperación verde apoya las aspiraciones socioeconómicas de Colombia, especialmente con dos elementos que varios de nuestros panelistas han mencionado: generar más empleo y la disminución de la desigualdad, ¿no? Dos grandes retos para nuestra región. Daniel.
Gracias, ministra. Un saludo a todos los participantes. Mi nombre es Daniel Gómez, soy subdirector general sectorial del Departamento Nacional de Planeación de Colombia. Quisiera entonces hacer unas reflexiones a partir de la experiencia en Colombia y el enfoque que le hemos dado a la política de reactivación después del choque enorme del COVID y la pandemia, en particular reflejado en nuestros índices de pobreza. Entonces, lo primero que quisiera destacar es que Colombia ha implementado y ha plasmado dentro de sus políticas de largo plazo una serie de compromisos con relación al cambio climático y con relación a nuestros compromisos internacionales con las metas de cambio climático. En particular, hay una política que aterriza los ODS a nivel nacional. Las políticas en Colombia las aprueba el Consejo Nacional de Política Económica y Social, que es un órgano colegiado presidido por el presidente y donde están los ministros del despacho, y que nos permiten crear, diseñar e implementar políticas de largo plazo con visión de largo plazo. Entonces, y también políticas que requieren actividades intersectoriales de varios ministerios. Entonces, es un instrumento realmente pues muy adecuado para pensar en los temas de sostenibilidad. En particular, tenemos entonces desde 2018 la política de ODS y también una política de crecimiento verde, que entonces lo que muestran es que Colombia venía en una senda de incorporación de consideraciones importantes de sostenibilidad desde antes de la pandemia, y lo que vimos fue que la pandemia nos obligó a acelerar nuestra agenda climática y nuestra agenda de crecimiento verde, limpio, sostenible y también con criterios de inclusión mucho más contundentes de lo que traíamos antes. La emergencia en Colombia representó pues una desaceleración económica en 2020 de 6.8%, un crecimiento negativo. Esto es la segunda vez en los últimos 80 años que Colombia tiene crecimiento negativo en un año, y eso pues es un reflejo de una estabilidad macroeconómica bastante destacable, con una ausencia de hiperinflaciones, ausencia de disparadas del desempleo, ausencia de crisis cambiarias, ausencia de decrecimientos, de unos ciclos económicos mucho menos pronunciados que en muchos otros países. Pero el año 2020, claramente, pues alineados con el resto del mundo, tuvimos una desaceleración importante. Lo que fue particular en Colombia fue el aumento en el desempleo. El aumento en el desempleo sí fue mucho más pronunciado que en otros países, y eso refleja también unos problemas estructurales del mercado laboral colombiano, que se tradujo inmediatamente en unos impactos importantes en cifras de pobreza, en particular cifras de pobreza urbanas. Logramos absorber parte de ese aumento en pobreza vía nuevos programas de transferencias monetarias, vía también una política de reactivación, pero entonces lo que nos mostró fue que teníamos que tener una política de reactivación que permitiera tener mayor inclusión y sostenibilidad. En este sentido, reconociendo el potencial biológico, bioeconómico de Colombia, Colombia siendo uno de los 17 países más megadiversos del mundo, con una riqueza natural, de capital natural enorme, y aún no explotada para producción de nuevos bienes, servicios, nuevas ventajas comparativas, nuevos modos de producción sostenibles con base en este capital natural, y el potencial de este capital natural de ofrecer unas nuevas fuentes de crecimiento, nuevas fuentes de empleo, nuevas fuentes de diversificación de nuestra canasta exportadora, que como ustedes saben está concentrada en productos extractivos en particular, también los ingresos del gobierno nacional central, los ingresos de regalías, todos tienen una concentración importante en carbón, en petróleo, en minerales que hay que diversificar. Entonces, en ese sentido, lo que hicimos fue dos cosas el año pasado importantes. Fue, uno, diseñar una política de respuesta inmediata al COVID que plasmó 4 objetivos. Uno, la protección del ingreso de los hogares a través de principalmente nuevos programas de transferencias monetarias no condicionadas. Segundo, la protección de la liquidez de las empresas para evitar que un choque temporal, como esperamos sea el COVID, no se traduzca en una insolvencia de largo plazo y un empeoramiento y un debilitamiento de nuestro tejido empresarial. Tercero, pues por supuesto la protección de la salud, y en cuarto lugar proteger las finanzas públicas. La segunda política es la política de reactivación que aprobó el Consejo Nacional de Política Económica y Social a principios de año, y que se llama una política de reactivación y crecimiento sostenible e inclusivo. Y lo que buscamos ahí es claramente incorporar medidas de corto plazo, pero también con una visión de mediano y largo plazo que permita la promoción de la bioeconomía en las regiones, nuevos negocios productivos asociados al capital natural, a la bioenergía, a la biocosmética, a ingredientes naturales, a la salud y a la bioproducción agrícola, el impulso de la economía circular para generar también nuevos empleos verdes, para ayudar a reducir desigualdad, sobre todo desigualdad regional, que es una de las dimensiones de la desigualdad en Colombia. También tenemos unas políticas para transversalizar criterios de adaptación climática en la prestación de servicios básicos de agua y saneamiento, y esto pues está también estrechamente relacionado a las condiciones de salud de nuestra población. También tenemos pues en esta línea unos esfuerzos importantes por invertir en infraestructura sostenible. Nuestro programa de alianzas público-privadas, las APPs en Colombia, están ya transitando hacia una versión de quinta generación, donde el tema de sostenibilidad de la infraestructura es central y fundamental, y unos de nuestros grandes proyectos de infraestructura vía APPs incluyen la navegabilidad del río Magdalena, la adecuación del canal del dique, que es un gran canal que conecta el Magdalena con el Caribe, y en este sentido, pues, el objetivo es pues invertir en nuevas fuentes de proyectos de infraestructura sostenible. Y finalmente, para ir cerrando mi intervención, también tenemos pues una agenda importantísima de transición energética que está muy relacionado con el punto de la concentración de nuestra canasta exportadora en unos pocos productos extractivos. Y acá la diversificación de la canasta minera va a ser fundamental. El proceso de transición a nivel local también es un tema importante plasmado en la política de reactivación, donde hay unos pocos departamentos en Colombia que tienen una dependencia enorme de economías extractivas como el carbón. Entonces acá la transición energética, la transición de la canasta minera, pues son temas que tienen implicaciones macroeconómicas para Colombia, pero también implicaciones muy locales con impactos sociales, económicos, en pobreza y en desigualdad que hay que gestionar muy adecuadamente. Entonces termino diciendo pues que los compromisos de Colombia plasmados en sus políticas ambientales se suman entonces a una política de reactivación. La política de reactivación en Colombia está articulada con estos compromisos internacionales, nuestros NDCs, que hablaremos de eso luego, que ya pues son unos compromisos muy ambiciosos a 2030 y 2050, pero que creemos que el programa de reactivación es una herramienta fundamental para acelerar la política ambiental con criterios de sostenibilidad y de inclusión a futuro. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Daniel, por compartir toda esta visión de ese paquete de políticas y cómo los elementos del impacto en desempleo. Now, we would like to hear the vision from the ministers of finance, and we've been hearing mainstreaming climate change in the development model requires to bring to the table our ministers of finance. So thank you, Christian Egan from the coalition, Secretary of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, for being here. And we would like to hear from you these elements of the perspective of ministries of finance and what are the key priorities in promoting a green recovery. Christian, and before giving you the floor, just a quick announcement to our panelists that since we are running out of time after this intervention, then I will give you 1 minute to each for a closing remark. So everyone, I hope they get prepared. Thank you. Christian, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Minister Meza, and thank you to UNEP and the organizers for inviting me to join this distinguished panel. I'm really very delighted to be here and say a few words on the occasion of the launch of the LAC Recovery Tracker. I mean, this is really an excellent initiative that is, will be the go-to source at this critical time and really essential to help understand and encourage action towards a green and inclusive recovery. As Secretary of the Coalition Secretariat and lead economist in the Macroeconomics, Trade and Investment Global Practice of the World Bank, I'm really seeing firsthand the challenges of shifting from COVID-19 rescue to green recovery and development. And this really is a critical moment in the lead up to COP26 to seek sustainable development trajectories. But before turning to the question that you posed, on the key priorities in promoting a green recovery from the perspective of ministries of finance and economists, maybe I could just say a couple of words about the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. So this is a relatively new global initiative that recognizes the challenges posed by climate change and the need for finance ministers and macro-fiscal financial sector economists, like at the World Bank and the IMF and other stakeholders, to join with ministers of environment and related stakeholders to really step up their engagement, for collective action on climate issues. So the coalition was launched at the World Bank IMF spring meetings in 2019 and is a country-led, country-owned grouping that has recently grown to 62 members and 20 institutional partners. We picked up 10 new members in the last month or two. And the coalition now covers about 39% of global CO2 emissions and 63% of global GDP. So of the 33 LAC countries, 12 are members, so we still have some work to do. And these are Argentina and Chile. Chile, which led the coalition as co-chair for the first 2 years and was really instrumental in the establishment of the coalition. Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Guatemala, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, and Uruguay. So how does the coalition work? So to join the coalition, finance ministers endorse the Helsinki Principles. It's a set of 6 aspirational principles that promote national climate action, especially through fiscal policy and the use of public finance. And from the World Bank and IMF side, we provide technical support, but also host the Secretariat and help the coalition serve its members as a platform to deepen engagement, share technical expertise, engage in best practices, encourage ambition, and generate collective solutions for low carbon, climate resilient development. So a key part of the coalition's work program, I mean, there's much that takes place under each of the Helsinki principles, but at the beginning of 2020, the coalition started working more on the recovery aspects, and we put out a paper called "Better Recovery, Better World: Resetting Climate Action in the Aftermath of the COVID-19 Pandemic." And this was led by the Grantham Research Institute and Brookings, and pulled in inputs from the IMF, the OECD, the World Bank, and World Resources Institute. And we're currently working on another paper and drawing upon a survey about recovery that was sent to coalition members, asking them about their priorities and constraints in making progress towards green recovery. So response rate to surveys is always a challenge. In this case, we've received responses from about 45% of members, but unfortunately only 3 countries from LAC responded. So I can't say too much that is LAC specific. But according to these surveys and the ongoing dialogue, the key priorities that finance ministries have been highlighting is the need to avoid retrograde steps, such as unwinding existing environmental regulations and policies, implementing comprehensive stimulus packages to promote recovery and build back better. That's really set this a clear trajectory going forward. Preparing a coherent strategy for investments that move quickly, that are labor intensive in the short run, that have high multipliers, and also bring co-benefits, including for climate and resilience. Implementing supporting policies such as carbon prices, regulations, and bailout conditionalities. I mean, as noted by Brian and Inger, noting her cookbook, there are numerous policies available to be considered at the country level, and these are also being discussed through the coalition. And then finally, this big challenge of ensuring that finance is available and aligned with sustainability, both to support stimulus investments and beyond, including stronger action to shift the financial system. So some of the preliminary results of the survey indicate that, as mentioned previously in the discussion of that Brian presented, on global stimulus efforts, the size of recovery is much bigger as a share of GDP in high-income countries than in emerging and developing countries. The overall categories and priorities are broadly consistent. The top things that come out from our members is mainly about jobs and multipliers, ensuring, this is from the finance ministry perspective, and trying to make sure that regulations don't slip. And a positive result from the survey is, in fact, that few of our members have reported a relaxation of environmental policies during COVID. A couple of the key constraints noted in the survey, factors holding back structural reforms. The most frequently cited constraints were political economy concerns, and that's we see that in the news every day, but also limited technical capacity, and this is something that the coalition tries to support members on. And finally, the financing issue. I mean, most of the recovery spending is financed by budget revenue and sovereign borrowing. And given the need to restore fiscal balances, as also noted by Minister Ford, and tightening international financing conditions for many of the emerging and developing economies, securing financing for recovery plans is a bit of a challenge. And accessing green finance, leveraging the private sector through local institutions are also noted constraints. So these are some of the findings of the survey. We're going to be writing these up and presenting these. They'll be online that people can look at their leisure at the coalition website. But let me close by just noting, that the World Bank, from the World Bank side, the World Bank is stepping up its support to client countries on the climate change agenda, recognizing that poverty and inequality and the challenges brought about by COVID and climate change really are interconnected and need to be addressed simultaneously and systematically through what we call green, resilient, and inclusive development, GRID for short. So this is also reflected in the World Bank's Climate Change Action Plan. The core parts of it were released at the spring meetings, and we're really working, with my cadre to try and mainstream climate issues among the 530 economists of the macroeconomic
Christian. We really
practice, including through core diagnostics like public expenditure reviews, aimed at following up on Patricia's call to focus more on spending better, as well as economic analyses. We're trying to do our part to work with all of you on the environmental side, from the economic side and the Ministries of Finance side, and looking forward to deepening that collaboration going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all. It has been a very interesting panel. We just ran out of time. So for the closing remarks of everyone, I will give you 1 minute to each of you. So you can, share with us your last reflection after hearing all these very well and positive elements that we've been hearing. So I will start with Inger, please, your 1 minute reflection.
My 1 minute of fame. Look, first of all, what we're hearing here, our country's stepping up. What we are hearing here is an understanding. What we need to get is the countries are debt stressed, especially maybe some of the Caribbean countries. So we need to see exactly the kind of leaning in from the IMF, the SDR availability, and a degree of flexibility in blended finance. We need to see a degree of solidarity around this region on vaccines, but also on financing. And as we've heard very clearly, and this is my final point within my last minute, is that green is not the enemy of growth. Green is the path to growth and to jobs. Let me stop here and thank my brilliant co-panelists for all this very, very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for taking and bringing these excellent ideas in 1 minute. Now over to you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Minister. Let me also thank my fellow panelists for a very incisive discussion and very exciting discussion about the road ahead. In terms of from the IMF perspective, as I said, this is obviously a very important area of work for us, both globally and in the region. We see the need to work with our membership and work with the international community to think through a comprehensive set of policies. Different countries may need a different mix of policies, but we need to look at things like the role for carbon and broader emissions pricing, new regulations, new technologies, incentives, fiscal incentives, fee-based, green budgeting, nature-based solutions. These are the areas that we are starting to look at. And we look very much forward to bringing the work forward, engaging further with this group, with our member countries to support a green and job-rich recovery. Thank you very much again for hosting this.
Thank you, Julie. And it's great to have IMF working with us in these endeavors. Now we'll give the floor to Minister Ford. 1 minute, Minister, for your last reflection. We don't hear you, Minister. If not, once you arrange the technical elements, then I will give the floor to Patricia Espinosa. Patricia, the floor is yours. 1 minute.
Thank you, Andrea. And let me say one thing. COP26 has to be a success. We cannot afford anything other than a full success. And one element for that success will be that one of the main messages coming out of the conference is precisely that all recovery efforts, all investments in order to recover will be aligned to Paris. Thank you, Minister. Over to you.
Thank you. COP26 must be a success. Absolutely. This is something that we are working on and that we really need to achieve that goal as well. So I will give the floor now to Minister Ford. Minister, can you speak to hear if we can hear you? Minister? No. Okay, so maybe I will jump then to Minister Quijandría. Please, your last 1 minute.
Muchas gracias, Andrea. A ver, para los que defendemos la ruta ambiental, el camino siempre será cuesta arriba. Pero creo que ahora es distinto. Tenemos a nuestro lado al FMI, tenemos al Banco Mundial y tenemos la evidencia, tenemos los estudios de OIT que demuestran los 15 millones de empleos que puede generar la descarbonización en América Latina, tenemos los estudios de la ruta hacia la descarbonización en los países. O sea, estamos en una posibilidad de cambiar el rumbo y mostrar que la ruta verde no es la mejor, es la única. Gracias.
Excelente mensaje, muchas gracias, ministro. Minister Ford, can you see if we can hear your reflections? Your mic is off. Minister, we cannot hear you. I'm sorry. Maybe there, can you speak now? Minister? No? We cannot hear you. I'm sorry. So I will give the floor then to Daniel to see if we have another chance to, and can somebody from the technical part can support the minister so we can hear him, please. Daniel.
Thank you very much. I'll close in English then. Reflecting and picking up on other comments, I would like to also emphasize that there need not be a trade-off between sustainability and growth, and we have to identify the opportunities to make both things match and incentives align, both in the public sector and in the private sector. So very important to have correct policy frameworks, the correct incentives in terms of taxes, but also in terms of a culture towards growth and the identification of these opportunities. And however, we do have in countries that have a huge potential in Latin America and elsewhere in the developing world, we do have the challenge of the transition. So we should not ignore these complicated, hard transitions, both at local levels, at national levels. We all agree that it's desirable, that it is the only path, as our colleague, the minister was saying, green growth is the only path, but we have to recognize that there will be losers, there will be transition costs, and to really consolidate these efforts, we have to build that coalition recognizing those transitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing the element of a just transition, which is so critical as well. Do we have now resolved the technical element so we can hear Minister Ford? Can somebody? Minister? Okay, no news right now. I'm sorry, Minister, so I will give the floor 1 minute to Christian.
Thank you so much. So all excellent comments, and very much agree. Especially on this point that it's not the one or the other. It's not environment or growth. It really has to be together. And for that, in terms of the actors, I think we need the environmental people and the economists on this shared journey, and ministries of environment working very much with ministries of finance to implement these policies and to reach the goals and commitments that will be made in at the COP26. So I think together we go forward. Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Minister. No, we really apologize for these technical difficulties, Minister. I don't know if you maybe want to write the message so we can share your last minute reflection. No, it's not working well. We apologize for this inconvenience. No? Okay. No. Well, thank you, Minister, and apologize for this. So now for the closing remarks, we give the floor over to you, Piedad. Thank you all for your wonderful reflections.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all our distinguished panelists. Thank you, Andrea, for this wonderful facilitation. I think we have a lot of new ideas, a lot of new hope and motivation to foster a green and sustainable recovery. I would like just to highlight that we have identified the challenges. Of course, there are many. We need to link the sustainable recovery to the decrease in poverty rates, to a new social compact on environment. I think we can put our hopes on that. To know that, yes, we need more investments, but we need also to invest what we have right now better. And the tracker is identifying some good practices, but also some gaps in terms of investments that are being devoted to non-sustainable sectors. So now we can also transit to this. I would like to retake some of the comments that we have in the YouTube channel, particularly the ones related to the youth that are accompanying us. I really think that they have to be involved as well. A just transition has to be based and not only count of young people in our region. This is a young region, full of hope, and also very active in the climate action. So I really would like to recall that. I really want to welcome as well the openness of the ministers of the region and countries to assume this initiative, to let us track the spending. Is not always easy to accept this scrutiny. So I think that I welcome the openness in sharing information, because citizens also are listening about green recovery, but when they come to analyze, check, access information on, is my country doing a green recovery, this is not available so easily. So this tracker also wants to be a citizen tool to see if the country is taking decisions in the pathway that citizens would like to see. So with this, I just want to really thank everybody being here, to give us also a lot of ideas on how to transit to sustainable development, to acknowledge that what we have now is a baseline. Now we have the baseline, and then we can monitor how we are progressing in the following months, and also to recognize that this is a tool that could be used for a regional position under the Forum of Ministers and other spaces to negotiate more support from the international community as it has been identified. For example, negotiate debt swaps for green recovery, have more alignment of the banks and the private funds towards green recovery options, and also support countries in taking decisions on adopting policy tools such as the ones mentioned today, carbon taxes or the reduction of fossil fuel subsidies, to open a little bit more the fiscal space and financial flows. I just would like to remember that you can find the tracker in recuperacionverde.com, and invite you to check the information there and share with us all the comments you may have, so we can adjust the tracker and release the report in the following weeks. Thanks very much, everybody, for being here today. Have a nice day. Buen día.